It begins with a king whose name is Ashur-uballit. By the way, Ashur was the name of the chief deity of the Assyrians, so you see that word showing up fairly frequently. He joins our friend, the Hittite king Suppiluliuma. Remember him? How remember that guy? Suppiluliuma, great guy. Now remember, just to help you connect dots here, Suppiluliuma is a king of the Hittites when the Hittites were really at their power. All right, the same Suppiluliuma forms a treaty with Ashur-uballit, and they together decide to put the squeeze on the Mitanni. And so they attack from both sides, and that is the end of the Mitanni and the beginning of the Assyrian Empire, at least the beginning of an Assyrian kind of dominant region, we'll say that. The Mitanni are driven out. We don't hear anything again from them again. And at this point, Ashur-uballit is able to establish a kind of regional presence and power that came to be called Assyria. He raised the standard of Assyrian brutality. There is absolutely no ancient civilization more famous for its gratuitous violence and ghastly forms of torture than the Assyrians. They would simply terrify people into submitting to them. And there are ghastly descriptions of some of the things they did, and many of those descriptions are found in this book. So this is not good bedtime reading, you know. But nevertheless, it does describe piling up corpses, skulls, flaying people alive, the kind of things junior high kids like to hear about. And I'm not going to bother you with more of it, but it was awful and horrific, and it only got worse for quite a period of time. That's part of the reason, by the way, the Assyrians were universally hated in the ancient world, was because of this very brutal kind of reputation they had. Suppiluliuma himself was so worried about this rising kind of brutal military power from Ashur-uballit that he actually put in a buffer state here to insulate himself from the Assyrians. He put one of his sons at Carchemish, one of them at Aleppo, and he's trying to create a little bit of a distance then between himself and the Assyrian power. We have a few minor kings. We won't bother with them. The next guy we're interested in is Adad-nirari. Adad-nirari rules from 1308 to 1275. And again, for those of you who've been in the class, this will have a little bit of a feel of review to it, I hope. But, by the way, there's a digital shot. These guys all look the same, you know. I don't know about you, but they all look the same to me. But they were all very proud of their visage, you know, so I don't know. Anyway, this is one of the first artifacts we have of this particular guy, Adad-nirari. After the Battle of Kadesh, ring a bell? The Battle of Kadesh, the greatest international battle to date, 1276 BC, between the Hittites and the commander Hattushili of the Hittites and Ramses II, known as Ramses the Great, takes place at Kadesh, that city in northern Syria. Both sides kind of bloody each other up and go home and leave that piece of real estate more or less unprotected for a time. And so what happens is this particular ruler, Adad-nirari, sweeps in and grabs a chunk of northern Syria. This is a dramatic expansion of Assyrian power, but he dies in 1275, the year after the Battle of Kadesh, and it brings the next guy, Shalmaneser, 1275 to 1244. He continues to push the borders of Assyria, pressuring the Hittites, and Hattushili, who had fought Ramses, the two of them had fought at the Battle of Kadesh. Hattushili realizes we have a common enemy that's worse than the two of us are toward each other. And so he actually sends an email to Ramses, says, "Hey, bud, remember that battle we fought a few years ago? I've got a better plan. Let's get married, you know." And so Hattushili actually sends a daughter to Ramses to become one of about 100 wives that Ramses had. I don't know if he ever met her, but there she was. And they formed this kind of liaison, a joint defense agreement intended to resist the encroaching Assyrian threat that both of them are feeling. And this gives rise to the earliest international treaty that's ever been discovered. We talked about this a few weeks ago. This is the tablet of the first international treaty. This was written in a cuneiform alphabet. It was a Hittite document. It's presently at the Istanbul Archaeology Museum. It was dated to 1272, so 4 years after the Battle of Kadesh, the Hittites and the Egyptians join in a league against the Assyrians. Okay. The tablet was found, by the way, by Hugo Winkler. And if you were here when we talked about the Hittites, you recall he's the guy that really discovered the Hittite civilization and actually discovered this stone tablet, although he wasn't able to read it. That took later scholarly effort. So that's Shalmaneser, and he's the guy that represents the cause of this international agreement, as we say. The last guy kind of starts losing power, so we have Tukulti-Ninurta, who begins to retreat a little bit. It's too wide, too far flung, he can't sort of support this kind of expansive territory, and so he begins to recede a bit, and it introduces the period that's called Assyrian decline. So the third of our eras of Assyrian history is the period of decline. This goes from 1208 to 911. This is interesting. Assyria basically goes dark. And sometimes you'll find ancient Near Eastern scholars refer to this as a kind of dark age, because everybody goes dark. We don't hear anything from the Mycenaeans. The Mycenaeans were basically seem to have been conquered and sort of demobilized by the sea people that came in. You recall we've talked about them. The Hittites are neutralized. Over the Assyrians go dark. The Babylonians, hear nothing of them. Even the Egyptians become quiet. The entire ancient Near Eastern world, for a period of about 250 to 300 years, is silent. So there you are. The Assyrian recovery begins, and they will now become the dominant power in the ancient Near East for the next several hundred years. They are the force to be reckoned with. After them, it'll be the Babylonians. After them, it'll be the Persians. After them, it'll be the Greeks. After them, it'll be the Romans. It's a line of Gentile powers, and it all begins here with the Assyrians. They become the dominant power at this point. Israel and Judah divide, you know that story, and become a divided kingdom from this point on. They gradually lose power. This is also the point where we have the beginning of the ministry of the prophets. And the first of those Old Testament prophets, the first guy in a line, a succession of prophets that will continue all the way down to Malachi, the first of those prophets is named Elijah. All right, so he shows up, 9th century prophet, and then Elisha, and then we go on from there. This whole period of Assyrian recovery begins with a guy named Adad-nirari II. Now here's what I want to do. I've got about 10 minutes left, so I'm just going to be inching a little further into this. We'll pick up most of this next week, but I want to save time to give you the second half of my Sunday school lesson this morning, so hang on. But what I want to do is keep our eye on two different balls in play, one the Assyrians and one Israel. So we're going to kind of work together, both tracks, because they do intersect at a certain point, and we need to see kind of how we get there. So that's what I have in mind. So Adad-nirari, not much to say about him, except he begins to be an empire builder. He's the beginning of Assyrian recovery. He moves Assyrian authority into the south, into Babylon. Although he treats it very cordially, the Assyrians always treated Babylon with a huge amount of reverential respect. It was always kind of viewed like a holy city for some reason, but nevertheless he asserts authority over it. In Judah, we have the next three kings during his reign. The first is Rehoboam, the son of Solomon. He trips up as a young man and, of course, provokes the rebellion. You know that story. Jerusalem is sacked by Shishak, the Egyptian pharaoh, in 925, makes off with a whole lot of the great wealth that Solomon had accumulated there. Otherwise, Rehoboam is not a bad king. He's given a fairly positive review. Abijam is the next one, only rules for a couple of years. And then good King Asa, right? The next king, 911 to 870. In the north, Jeroboam is the rebel. He sparks the rebellion against the house of David and establishes then the 10 northern tribes, what's usually called Israel. So you have Judah and Israel. In order to try to prevent or at least dissuade people from going to Jerusalem to worship, he very conveniently sets up some nice golden calves. Isn't that great? So the people could worship right in their backyard. It was just nice, you know. You had these nice golden calves. It was a great place to worship, and they didn't have to bother going to Jerusalem. And so he sets those up, setting a bad precedent, of course, in Israel that will continue more or less unabated until Israel is finally deported. The next ruler of Assyria is Tukulti-Ninurta, 891 to 884. He consolidates gains. He's continuing to build the Assyrian power. He rebuilds the walls of Ashur. Asa is continuing to reign in Judah. Israel is beginning to show considerable instability. You've got a succession of fairly short-term kings: Baasha, Elah, Zimri, Omri, who will be the father of Ahab, as you know. And so things are not looking so good in the north. There's a certain amount of stability in the south. Assyria is continuing to grow and expand its power. Next guy is Ashurnasirpal II. Again, looks like all the others to me, but there he is. Renowned for his brutality. In fact, even the History Channel did a little snippet on this guy not too long ago, discussing how brutal he was. He was unprecedented in the ghastly forms of torture that he meted out on those who he was trying to conquer. He was a great empire builder. He treated Babylon with respect. He expanded Assyrian domains into Syria, which is to the north of Israel. He made peace with the Phoenicians. In Judah, we have Asa wrapping up in 870. Jehoshaphat, another good king, ruling from 870 to 848. The only thing he does that's a little questionable is he allies with Ahab, you know, the king in the north. On the other side, we have Ahab, the son of Omri. And of course, this is where we have Elijah introduced. So about Ahab takes Naboth's vineyard in 856. He dies in battle with the Syrians in 853. This brings us to Shalmaneser. Another good-looking guy. This is a statue of him at the British Museum. In 35 years of reign, he undertook 31 campaigns, so you can tell what he was doing in his spare time. Continued his policies of respect toward Babylon. He attacks Syria. And in the process, Hazael, who had been anointed by Elijah, assassinates the king, Ben-Hadad, who's mentioned in the Old Testament. Hazael himself gets locked into Damascus, the capital of Syria. And, interestingly, Jehu, who became the ruler of Israel, pays tribute to Shalmaneser III, and that's recorded for us in a great artifact that was found by Austin Henry Layard when he was doing his archaeological work there in the region of Assyria, and it's called the Black Obelisk. This is what it looks like. It's at the British Museum. Discovered in 1846. It's very interesting to us because it's the earliest artifact that has a picture of an Israelite ruler inscribed upon it. And that is very interesting. And the Israelite ruler who's mentioned here coincides perfectly with the Assyrian story of what's going on. So the biblical account and the Assyrian account at this point are in point-for-point agreement. The Israelite king is Jehu. The inscription that's included here reads as follows: "The tribute of Jehu, son of Omri, I received from him silver, gold, a golden bowl, a golden vase with pointed bottom, golden tumblers, golden buckets, 10, a staff for a king, and spears." Sounds like something for a wedding planner, doesn't it? But that's what it says. So there it is. The image that shows Jehu is here. Can you see that? Jehu's the guy on his hands and knees. That's Shalmaneser to the left, standing up.